Well, welcome to the very last lecture, the last lecture hour of the whole conference. And what a fitting place to put a talk about suicide, because no one likes to talk about this. And I find it very important to talk about it. It's not an easy subject, not a cheery subject. So when I saw that I was the last lecture, I thought, that's kind of the way society treats this problem. Nobody likes to talk about this. So let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. I'm Wayne Zigowitz. I'm a division chief with Littleton Fire Rescue. I've been in the fire service for 32 years. I've been a paramedic for 27 years. I'm a graduate of the National Fire Academy Executive Fire Officer Program. I'll tell you a little bit about how this plays into that. I have a master's degree in executive leadership that I finished at the age of 58 last year. So I'm very proud of that, something I worked on for a long time. Let's see, I write for JEMS. I'm on the editorial board for JEMS magazine. You might have seen some of my stuff. I don't know why they pay me to write, because I never did well in English. I hated writing, but for some reason I write and people like what I have to say, and I write it to a certain level where people enjoy reading it. So I'm on the editorial board for JEMS. Thank you all for coming. I hope you've had a good conference. Everybody have a good conference here. I'm not sure this is the way to end it, but I think I've got some information for you about this problem. This is a sensitive situation, sensitive talk, so I have to be careful what I say and how I say it, because probably 1 in 6 people will be affected by suicide. So when I look at the number of people in here, that tells me that probably 10 of you have been affected by suicide somewhere in your life. Somebody you knew, a relative, a loved one, a friend. This is something that nobody likes to talk about. And when I started doing this research, and it relates back to the National Fire Academy, in the Executive Fire Officer Program, you go through 4 years of a master's level program, and each year is a specific topic where you travel back to the Fire Academy for 2 weeks, and you learn about a certain thing, and then you go back and you write a thesis on it. So one of the classes that I had to write a thesis for was Leading Community Risk Reduction. And boy, you can think of a lot of injury topics that you could write on. Elderly falls, those kind of things. But this one came to me because of a situation that we had in Littleton, which I'll tell you about. And I studied suicide for 6 months. You have 6 months to write your thesis before it is submitted. So I studied suicide for 6 months. I went to suicide prevention programs. I talked to people who had survived an attempt to take their own life. I talked to family members. I talked to rescue people, providers, about their feelings about suicide and having to take care of family members or go into scenes and examine what has happened, declare the dead. It was really depressing for 6 months. I've written on a lot of other topics. None of those other topics has quite taken the toll on me during that time. And actually, I think the more I learned about it, I actually maybe got a little depressed about what I found out. A couple of things I found out is that, I already told you one of them, society doesn't like to talk about this. And then when you see the numbers of the people who die by suicide, if this was some other disease, we would be doing something about it. And it would be at the forefront. But that's not the case here. And so I've presented this lecture a number of times, and people have said certain things to me about their lives and about, you know, when somebody comes up and says, wow, I actually tried to take my life at one point. You know, what else can you say? Thank God you're still here. And so we're gonna talk about this, and please stop me at any point and ask questions. I'm not a psychologist. I'm a fire chief that found a community risk, and I tried to develop a standard operating procedure for how to deal with people who have attempted suicide. I've tried to develop a brochure that I put in the back and educate my folks on what to say to people's family members when you get there and have to deal with some family member whose husband has just taken their life. And I learned that when you pick up a paramedic textbook, there's out of a 1,500-page paramedic textbook, there's only a page and a half about suicide. And so I decided that I was going to talk about this. And I was going to talk about it as much as I could so everyone could understand, who wanted to listen to me, especially rescue people, that this is something that needs to come to the forefront, because many of these deaths are needless deaths, and they are preventable deaths. And in some cases, if they're predictable, they're surely preventable. So that's my preamble. And again, if you have specific questions, personal questions, feel free to come up to me afterwards, and I'll talk with you about it on a more personal level. I guess I should plug this part in. And I'm from Littleton, Colorado. Anybody hear of Littleton, Colorado ever? Yeah, why? Anybody recall? Columbine High School shooting. It was a homicide-suicide attack on the school, and it changed the way rescue people and fire people look at safety in their community. It really changed the way police officers look at active shooters. It really was a changing event in both law enforcement and fire and EMS. We just had another shooting, another homicide, suicide in Littleton at Arapahoe County, or Arapahoe High School at the end of last year. Very similar scenario, not quite to the same magnitude, but again, suicide of the person who attacked Arapahoe High School that day. So, emergency response to crisis, when I started researching this, I found, like I said, there wasn't much for us folks, rescue people, on understanding how and what to do in these cases. And I decided that I was going to go out and I was going to do something about that. And I think I have over the 2 years that I've done this. But really, no group is immune to suicide. Doesn't matter what sex you are, what race you are, what age, gender you are. No one is immune to suicide, and it affects a lot of people in our society. Let's just look at a couple people. There surely is a much longer list, but over the years, some of the more notable people who have taken their lives by suicide. And I don't want to use the word commit. That's one thing I learned very early in researching this. Use the word commit. They committed suicide. When you talk to people in suicide prevention, that's not the right term to use. No one commits to take their own life. They took their life by suicide. Ernest Hemingway, very famous writer. Marilyn Monroe, of course. We know about her. Hunter S. Thompson lived in Colorado, in my beautiful state. He took his own life with a handgun. Kurt Cobain. And the lists go on and on and on. And these weren't people that had, many of these people, they didn't have financial problems. They didn't have impending environmental problems. They weren't divorcing. When you look down the list of the number of people, these were successful people who took their life by suicide. So a lot of very influential people have taken their lives by suicide. So here's what we're going to talk. We're going to start off with what my objectives are today. We'll talk a little bit about the terms so you understand the terms related to this. We're going to look at the scope of the problem. And in my beautiful state of Colorado, matter of fact, the western states have the highest level of suicide in this country. Nothing against you people out here, but a lot of people seem pretty uptight out here in the East Coast. We're pretty laid back in Colorado. We've got legal marijuana there. How bad could it be? You know? So really, the western states have the highest level of suicide anywhere in the country, which was surprising me. Honestly, before I started this quest, I knew nothing about suicides. For 25 years, I responded to people, and I never put the dots on a map until I started this research. We'll look at the myths and commonalities about suicide, risk factors, emergency response. Can I just show a show of hands of how many people have been trained to respond to suicide in here? Okay, maybe 5%? What the heck? You know how to treat somebody who's got a knife in their chest or having a heart attack, but we don't know what to do with people who have attempted suicide and people who have taken their lives and how to deal with their family. Matter of fact, it is that awkward moment when you have to deal with a family member. Or it is that, we call it the stare. Everybody is on scene and no one knows what to say. I've been there many times. No one knows the right thing to say. Or you have someone who attempted suicide and you're afraid to ask them or talk to them about their method or their plan because you don't know what to say. So we'll look at the risks, the commonalities, the risk factors, emergency response, how to deal with survivors, and what suicide prevention is out there. You know that we have a national suicide prevention plan. How many people knew that here? I had no idea. And it's been around for years. And part of it says that we, gatekeepers of society, gatekeeper of society is somebody who interfaces with the public on a regular basis. That's firefighters, paramedics, clergy people. We are the gatekeepers of the society. We should be, the plan says we should be educated in suicide prevention and detection. And we're the first ones that should spot people that are on the edge. But we have no education. Nobody likes to talk about this. So at the end of this, hopefully you will understand that the scope of this problem. If you don't know it, you will know by the end. Identify the risk factors. Remember certain emergency response procedures and how to deal with it. Develop a couple standard operating procedures. What happens when someone takes their life in a public place? What do you do with that? Okay, we developed an SOP for that. What do you say and do to people who have attempted, or what do you say to their families when they have completed suicide? I have an SOP for that. I think that's the one that I put in your handouts that you can get online. Recall how to effectively help suicide survivors. Understand a little bit about the National Suicide Prevention Program that's been around for a very long time, and identify 5 lessons learned. There's a lot of references out there for you to go to. I've thrown a couple of them up there. And let me say one other thing. My research paper that I wrote, it was actually a niche, because like I said, I found out nobody was doing this. If you want my research paper that has a whole outline of this class that I want you to take back and turn it into a PowerPoint and start talking about it, the SOP, the brochures are all in that. If you want that, I have that on my phone. I will email that to you before you leave. Or you can find me at the City of Littleton and talk to me about it later, okay? So these are all the references that you can find out there. So let's talk a little bit about the glossary of terms associated with this. Depression. I think most people know what depression is, but depression, most people who take their own lives are depressed and have depression. Gatekeepers, that's us, who face-to-face contact with people on a daily basis. We're the gatekeepers of society. Intentional, purposeful human action to cause your own death. Means and method, we'll talk about that later, because when you have somebody who's attempted suicide, in the back of your ambulance, this is what you should be talking about to determine how serious they are. Do you have the means and do you have the method to take your own life? Most people say, oh, don't talk to people who are thinking about suicide because then they'll do it. Actually, you need to talk to people. You need to engage them and ask them, do they have the means and the method? And sometimes when you ask them that, not only can you detect how serious they are, but it's actually a relief for them. Somebody actually wants to talk to me about this. And actually, the opposite could happen. You could actually prevent their suicide. Postvention, strategy approach that is implemented after the crisis. We're really good at that. You know, we're going to save a lot more lives in EMS doing prevention than we are doing postvention, responding to people who've fallen and broken their hip, responding to heart attacks. We should be putting our money on the prevention side instead of, the prevention side instead of the postvention side. By the time we do it with suicide, it's too late. Risk factors, those things that an individual may have going on in their lives that will make them a higher level of risk for suicide. Stigma. Stigma, I think you all know what that is. I have colleagues in the fire service, who if you having a heart attack or you've got an appendicitis, your brothers and sisters rally around you and are there to support you. But if you tell them you have depression or you have a mental health issue, they don't want anything to do with you. Stay away. Stigma. Suicidal behavior, that is the spectrum of activities, thoughts that can lead up to a completed suicide. Suicide ideation. Self-reported thoughts of engaging in suicide behavior. So that's what you need to talk to people. Do you have suicide ideations? Do you have a means? Do you have a method? And if they can answer those questions very clearly and straightforward, you know how serious they are. You know what suicide is. That's really the self-inflicted death imposed by yourself. Suicide attempt, when people attempt to take their own lives and are not successful. And if you run in an urban environment, you can see the same person over and over and over again until they eventually complete suicide. Suicide attempt survivors, those are the people who have had prior suicides and have survived. And suicide survivors, they're not the one who've attempted. Those are the people around them, their family, their friends. So what is the scope of the problem in our states here? This is the scope of the problem worldwide. Now this is deaths per 100,000 people. So 13 in the red is greater than 13 deaths per 100,000 people. In the state of Colorado, we're any given year anywhere 16 to 18%. 16 to 18 people per 100,000 people. So in Colorado, we would be edging on red. It goes back and forth. So suicides per 100,000 people. You can see this is the state of Colorado right here. Go Broncos. That's the reaction I get all the time. What a waste of a Super Bowl. So you can see the western states, people who seem to be pretty laid back, that's where most of the suicides are happening. I always thought that the East, so densely populated, what I consider a tougher life. I grew up in Chicago, moved to Colorado, so I'm pretty laid back now. Pretty uptight when I was in Chicago. That's not where it's happening. Matter of fact, the lowest rates of suicide are on the East Coast. So here's the national facts. While we're in here for an hour, 3 people in this country will take their lives to suicide. 86 Americans every day die by suicide. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Annually, 32,000 needless, preventable deaths by taking their own lives. It's the 11th leading cause of death in the United States. boy, it seems like we should be doing something about that. It seems like we should be screaming to public health people to do something about this. Most of these occur in men in those age groups, and more males take their lives than females, but more females attempt suicide than males. Most of these folks are white men. Most of it happens with a firearm. We have easy access to guns here in the United States. Here's the sad thing, that many never told anybody in a mental health capacity of their depression or their suicide ideation. It's the second leading cause of death of teens in the United States, and in Colorado and where I live, it's never so evident. We have cluster suicides of very young people, sometimes in groups, sometimes in promises, sometimes in their parents' closet, sometimes in the foyer of their apartment complex. It's just not an easy thing to deal with as a rescuer. Adolescence nearly tripled. Now let's talk about older folks. Even though elderly Americans account for only 20% or 13% of the population, 20%, they account for 20% of the people that take their lives. And many of these go unreported. They don't account for passive suicides, overdosing on your medication, not eating to the point where you die from it. I lost my mom last year. She died, and she was 87 years old. She had a really good life, but I saw this happen with a number of her friends who took their own lives, a couple through passive suicides. 85% of the elder suicides are male, and many of them involve a gun. One was a veteran of World War II who dressed up in his military uniform and shot himself in the head at his high-rise that we responded to. Colorful Colorado. It's the sixth leading cause of death in Colorado, 47 suicides per month in our state. And we're taking our lives at a rate of about 16 people per 100,000 when the national average is about 11%. Our senior citizens are even higher, 26 deaths per 100,000 people. 100,000 people in our senior population. So Littleton, Colorado, I'll tell you a little bit about our area, and I've written about this in JEMS. I've written a number of articles about suicide in JEMS if you want to put my name in there. But last year, 2 adult males hung themselves on 2 separate ends of town. Both were found by their wives when they arrived from work. Both were hanging in their garage. Both were detected right about 5:30 in the afternoon, and our crews went separate directions to basically the same call. I was on one of those calls, and it was that awkward silence trying to deal with the wife, what to say, what to do. We're action people. We need to have action. We need to save people's lives, and it's very awkward. A veteran senior, another veteran who dressed up again in his uniform and put a bag over his head and taped it shut and suffocated to death. A winter suicide at our state park about 5 miles from my house. Guy dressed up with an overcoat, and this is directly from the ice fisherman, put an overcoat on, filled it with rocks, went out and cut a hole in the ice and drowned. And we had to go recover his body. Chemical suicide in a car, cluster teenager suicides, Columbine, Arapahoe, and then suicide at Station 13, our firehouse. I wrote about this in JEMS, 2-part series. You can find that online. This was a senior citizen, who had resuscitated from a suicide attempt 6 months to the day. His neighbor found him. We resuscitated him. After he went to the ER, he spent 30 days in hospital psychiatric care, and then drove to our firehouse 6 months to the day. Neighbor said he went up to the door, knocked on the door, nobody was there. Came out, opened his trunk, pulled a handgun out. There's a school where kids cut through our parking lot on their way home. It was right about that time. Pull out a handgun, shot, and killed themselves right on the basically the sidewalk in front of the fire station. So I wrote 2 articles about this. You can find this online about that experience. The second article is geared more towards our safety. What happened had we been home with our bay doors open, like they always are, because we are friendly people in the fire service. He could have easily come in, killed the crew, killed himself, and nobody would have ever figured that out in time to save anybody. So I started researching this. After that call, I started researching this for my thesis paper. And I started at the CDC website. You can go there and access the Web-Based Injury Statistics Query and Reporting System, WSCARS. You can put in your city, you can put in your county, you can put in whatever injury you want. You can put in any age group, and you get a table of results. And it was my surprise when I found out then that we were the 6th leading state in the nation for suicide. I had no idea. And then I started thinking about over the years of all the suicides that I had seen as a provider. And then it started to make some sense. So you can put it in, you can skew the data any way you want. Go take a look at that. It's actually pretty interesting. So choosing death over life. Boy, I surely enjoy life, as many of you do. So the thought of choosing death is not something that logically fits in this brain. But as you study this, you figure out that at the end, for most of these people, it is a very logical choice of what they did or about to do. And we'll talk about how you get to that point. So, very complex situation. Anybody of any age group could do this. And we have seen people as young as 10 years old take their own life. It's difficult to understand. It's difficult to predict. Mental health care in our state is absolutely non-existent. We are like the 3rd or 4th state in the nation when it comes to mental health issues, and we are the 47th state in the nation for health care funding. They closed one of the biggest psych wards in Colorado, at the University of Colorado, in favor of opening up a cardiac rehab facility because, frankly, mental health does not pay. There's not those kind of dollars in mental health as you will find as there is in cardiac research and rehab. The other thing is seeking help is stigmatized by society. Like I said, nobody wants to talk about this, and I can't talk about it enough. It's an awful way to die. Most people, it is very private and it is inexpressible. Most people keep these things to themselves. They do give you signs if you know what to look for, but this is a very private journey that a lot of people are on. It's prolonged and it's intense. If you could imagine thinking that right now or today is my last day, is pretty overwhelming for any of us. It's often violent. Handguns, a leading cause of death, that's where we come in. We have to respond. We never saw the deaths. We had a father kill 5 family members and himself, and the grandmother came over and found them all, and we had to respond and take her to the hospital and deal with her. That was very stressful for our folks. We never saw the bodies. Just dealing with her grief was hard on our folks. But in many cases, we have to go in and declare the dead. And in many cases, I don't know where you live, but in our case, the cops go, oh, only they're dead. We only need one responder in there. Our SOP doesn't say that. We're not sending anybody into that scene without physical and psychological support. So 2 people go in at a time, no matter what the cops say. You want us in there? It's 2 or it's none. The amount of guilt the family members have to deal with, their unfathomable loss. This is what one of the families said to me. The confusion and devastation that follows this happening are absolutely beyond description. It turns you upside down. So what's known? Certain conditions predispose people to suicide, and then you add in certain environmental conditions like a down economy, or losing a job, or losing your house, or potentially being homeless. Sectors of society are more vulnerable, but remember what I said at the beginning of this. It crosses all boundaries. All race, gender, age, all cultures are affected by suicide. So let's talk about some of the myths of suicide, the 15 myths of suicide. That suicide survivors are somehow the cause of the death of suicide. And this is a very heavy thing to deal with for a wife or a family member who has to deal with a loved one who's taken their lives, because maybe it was that last argument that I had last night that they think may have led to this, even though it's very rarely spontaneous that somebody's going to wake up and take their life today. Normally, it leads up to this over time, a tunneling or a narrowing of personal choices. This is a very grave misconception, and that's because society feels like we always have to have someone to blame. There's a lot of factors, as you will see, that play into this. Lots of suicides turn out to be homicides. No, not actually. Only about 8% of the apparent suicides actually, after investigation, turn out to be homicides. Suicide death is a crime. And really, there is no state in the nation that has a law that makes suicide a crime. That people who take their own lives, wow, I can't believe that that word got by me, commit. People who take their own lives are failures. We already saw that. There's a lot of people who are very successful, highly famous, successful, intelligent people that got more money than you know what to do with. Take their own lives by suicide. That it is inherent or genetic that if dad took his life, that his son or grandson will take their own life. That there's some gene out there that predisposes somebody. Actually, there isn't. It is not inherent. There is no gene that makes you a higher risk for suicide. It is a learned behavior that perpetuates among families. They learned that from another family member. They didn't have the family didn't have mom didn't have the coping mechanisms, and she took her own life, and now son doesn't have his own coping mechanism, and he learned that mom easily escaped all this by taking her own life. It's a behavioral disorder. It is not a genetic predisposed gene that we carry around. That all people who choose suicide are insane. We know that already by the number of people who are very successful. It is a behavioral disorder. That suicide is usually unpredictable. In some cases it is, but somewhere along the line, somebody gave clues and warning signs that we simply missed. We knew that was the case with Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. They gave a lot of signs. Nobody picked up on them. When you read about the Arapahoe High School shooter that just happened, went in there and killed this beautiful young lady, Claire, he gave a lot of signs and symptoms. They were just ignored. Even the teachers, and one of our fire chief's wives is a teacher who had this young man in her class, and she says, in retrospect, I missed it. I just didn't pick up on the clues that he was giving me. People who talk about suicide usually don't follow through. Boy, pay attention. 75% of the people who take their lives gave some signs or clues before they did it. Suicide people intent on dying, actually not. Actually, they hope that someone will find them and stop before they die. That they are ambivalent about dying. That they just need hope. They need someone to listen, somebody to talk to them. They need help. If a person becomes suicidal, they are suicidal forever. Nope, that's not the case. It's a state of mind, and it's usually always temporary, and it's usually related to depression. That if we could just intervene, that these are preventable deaths. After suicidal crisis has occurred, outward improvement of a suicidal person means they are no longer a threat to taking their own lives, which is not the case. Most suicides happen about 3 months after the person improves. They get a renewed energy to go back and take their own life. Those who try and fail will not try again. Attempts, when somebody tells you, when a patient tells you, when you're asking medical history, they said, yeah, I attempted to take my life. That should be a big red flag for you. 6 months ago, I tried to take my life. That should be a really big red flag. Attempt suicide people will try again unless there's some kind of intervention. People with substance abuse problems generally don't take their own lives. Well, 1/3 of all suicides are completed by a person that has some kind of dependency. Alcohol plays a big role in this. Alcohol is a disinhibitor. So when they're not drinking, they probably wouldn't do this. But alcohol is a disinhibitor. Go to any bar and listen to the people who think they can sing. Okay? Or dance. Okay? It is a disinhibitor. It can cause impulsive suicides. When they're drinking, they will consider this and take their own life. Ask if somebody feels suicidal. Talking to somebody about suicide increases the risk of a person taking their life. This is just the opposite is true. Talking eases their anxiety. They want to talk. So when you're in the back of the ambulance, strike up a conversation, because you may be the only one who cares about them. And this will be such a relief to have someone. You know, when you go through this mental health thing, it wears people down. It wears families down. It gets to the point where, you know, well, there's Uncle Bob. He's at it again. He'll never complete because he just doesn't want to die. You know, it wears people down, and they get a little callous about it, and they ignore it now. And so the signs go unrecognized. But it eases their anxiety and allows them an opportunity to talk about their feelings, which in many cases people don't want to listen to anymore because it's been going on for a long time. There's little help possible for those contemplating suicide. Actually, seeking therapy and advice and guidance can greatly reduce suicide and a speedy recovery. But we got to get the people to therapy. We got to get them to talk. Early recognition is the key. And who does that? The gatekeepers of society. Rescue people, clergy people. People are going to talk to us. But we can't ignore the signs. And you know, I hear this from my folks all the time. Oh, God, another mental health call. I hate to use this term, but someone said it to me. It's a nuisance call. You know? Give me trauma or let me sleep. I got a lot of those kind of providers. But your real skills come in when you run into people like this. The ability to interface with somebody, mental health person, and really get through to them. You might be the difference between them taking their own life and not. So let's talk about some of the commonalities now of suicide. We talked about the myths. Let's talk about the commonalities. The purpose of this is to seek a solution. And they have narrowed their choices down to their problems to this solution. That is a very common thing. that the goal of suicide is to cease the consciousness that they currently live in because it is so painful. It is intolerable psychological pain that they are dealing with on a daily basis from the time they wake up and are conscious till the time they go to bed and they are unconscious. Anybody ever have back pain? All day long, back pain? Jesus Christ. The only thing that makes my back pain better is for me to take a Percocet and go to sleep. Okay? Now imagine having psychological pain like that every moment of your waking day. And there is no pill that you're going to take that's going to help that. Another commonality is their frustrated psychological needs. They're frustrated because no one will listen to them. No one will help them. The common emotion is helplessness and hopelessness. No one cares. No one wants to listen. Nobody really cares if I take my life or not. The cognitive state of mind is ambivalence. They're in the middle of, do I want to live or do I want to die? And they can go in either direction. And we can make a difference as responders in their lives. The common perpetual state of suicide is constricting, tunneling, and narrow choices. They have thrown out every other choice in life to solve this psychological pain, that they've tunneled into one thing, and that's ending their life. That's going to take care of the pain. It's all about escape. It's escaping from that psychological torture that they have in every waking moment of their life. The common interpersonal act in suicide is communication of intent. They will tell someone. They will give clues. They will talk to you if you talk to them. Common consistencies is lifelong coping pattern. No one taught them how to face the world. No one taught them coping mechanisms. Many of those coping mechanisms we learn from our parents, but they've never developed that in life. So let's look at some of the risk factors. Biophysical risk factors. Mental disorder is the leading one. Depression and mental disorder. And that's very treatable. If you can interface with psychological counseling, if you can better living through chemistry, get on the right medication, you can lead a very healthy, happy, productive life if you can get plugged in. But remember what I told you about Colorado? We're not even funding anything. 47th state in the nation with one of the highest suicide rates, 6th in the nation for suicide, one of the lowest funding rates in the whole country. Alcohol and other substance abuse, hopelessness, aggressive tendencies, trauma or abuse in their life is another thing we hear from family members, that these folks had been abused or had trauma in their life, bad car accident, loss of a family member. Major physical illness, previous suicide attempts, and we talked about a family history of suicide, a learned behavior, not a genetic, not a gene, but a learned behavior. And sometimes you see it perpetuate through generations. We just, in the neighboring fire department next to me, one of the senior firefighters took his life at the end of last year, and then about 2 months later, his father took his life. A learned behavior. Environmental risk factors, job loss, economic issues, relationship issues, social issues, easy access to lethal means, handguns, drugs, pills. Just go to any friend's house, and while you're in the bathroom, open up their medicine cabinet and just take a look. If you wanted to take your own life, any of your friends probably have that in their medicine cabinet. Local clusters of suicide that have a contagious influence, and like I explained to you early in this talk, we had that in Colorado, Douglas County, one of the fastest growing counties in the nation for a number of years, had a cluster suicide problem that's been going on for about 3 years. Whenever we have seen one or two, we have seen 2 or 3 to follow. And that's still going on even today. Other risk factors, lack of social support. So when you're a responder and you're going to a house, and all of these should be red flags. He's attempted suicide before. He is a drinker. He has got depression. He admits to depression. And there's no family member. He's isolated. These should be all red flags. It's almost as if we should have a checklist for this. And at a certain point, if you're not educated, you don't put all of the dots on the map. But it's almost as if we should have a checklist, and if we get to a point on the checklist, we go, holy cow, this guy can easily take his own life today. We need to get him plugged into mental health. The stigma associated with health-seeking behavior, we talked about that already. You know, I break my leg, everybody wants to rally around me. But boy, you got a mental health issue, nobody wants to come near you. Certain cultural and religious beliefs. In some, you look at what happens with suicide bombers. That is a noble resolution, a noble cause, that someone will take their own lives in the name of God. And we see people in terrorist organizations exploit that belief. Exposure through the media that, that this is a good way to go out. And we've seen movie stars get that kind of behavior. Instead of somebody in the media saying, this is terrible. This is really bad. We could have saved her. We could have saved them. But that's not the way the media portrays it. And then the influence of others who had died by suicide. There are still admirers out there of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. And you can, you hear about local terroristic activity at schools, and you'll find out that they had clippings from the Columbine High School shooting of these people. They were admired. Talk a little bit about depression. I already said that that's one of the leading factors in completed suicides. Major cause of suicide, and it could happen in any of us for a number of reasons. Estimated 30 million Americans suffer from depression. It crosses every boundary, and nearly all suicide people are depressed, and it actually is very treatable if you get help. This is kind of crazy. This is the kind of help that sometimes you want to get help, but the system that we live in, the healthcare system, is so complicated. I heard this clip and I just had to laugh because this is our mental health care system in this country.
Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Hotline. If you are obsessive compulsive, press 1 repeatedly. If you are codependent, ask someone to press 2 for you. If you have multiple personalities, press 3, 4, 5, and 6. If you are paranoid, we know what you are and what you want. Stay on the line and we'll trace your call. If you're delusional, press 7 and your call will be transferred to the mothership. If you are schizophrenic, listen carefully and a small voice will tell you which number to press. If you are depressive, it doesn't matter which number you press, no one will answer you. If you are dyslexic, press 69696969. If you have a nervous disorder, please fidget with the hash key until the beep. After the beep, please wait for the beep. If you have a short-term memory loss, please try your call again later. And if you have low self-esteem, hang up. All our operators are too busy to talk to you.
It is a complicated system that we live in if you have mental health problems, to try to maneuver, and not only maneuver, pay for it. Who's going to pay for this treatment? Because this is not like a broken leg where we take you to the hospital, we fix you, and in 2 months you're back on the path. This goes on, in some case, for years, and it gets expensive. Symptoms of depression. I'm not sure I've ever been depressed, but I sure have had a lot of stress in my life that has caused me some of these symptoms. But these are symptoms we need that checklist again. When you're interfacing with these people in the back of the ambulance, These are the things that should come right to the top. This guy has these things, he's probably depressed. Stress. Stress in our lives. High levels of stress, prolonged periods can cause a ton of changes in our body. I tested for fire chief at the end of last year and I didn't get it, and that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because my stress level would have been here. And now my new chief from Florida, his stress level is here, and I'm booking dive vacations. Matter of fact, in a month, I'm going scuba diving in Cozumel. So personal stress and resiliency in life, if you haven't heard that word resiliency, that's what we're doing now. That CISD thing over bad calls, that never had any data to support that it ever worked. As a matter of fact, it might have traumatized people after going through that again. Now we're teaching people to be resilient. We're teaching them 12 skills to be resilient. It's brand new training. We just did a fire academy for our academies. We brought in these folks. We're teaching them to be resilient in life, to deal with the ups and downs instead of like this, but teaching them 12 skills to help smooth out those peaks and valleys and make them more, make their lives easier to deal with and easier to handle and understand. Matter of fact, Dr. Callahan just received one of JEMS' top 10 Innovators Awards Wednesday night for his work in resiliency training. We're the second fire department to teach these skills to folks. You know, how many times do you see guys come in and put their badge down after a successful career and walk away because no one ever taught them how to deal with the ups and downs of this tough job and their tough life together? Resiliency training. Remember that. You're going to hear that as we move into the future. Post-traumatic stress disorder. If you see enough dead bodies and enough suicides, you will develop post-traumatic stress disorder unless you find out some way to deal with it. And how many in your career have I seen in 32 years? Some of them I can remember all of the details, even today, very vividly. That's post-traumatic stress. Then you add in depression, and then you add in alcohol abuse, and then there's disaster. So it's an erosion. It's an erosion. Suicide is very rarely spontaneous. It is a wearing away of the person's individual ability to cope because they are not resilient. They do not have resiliency in their lives. It's the last straw, but it is a very logical thing to do at the end. They have narrowed it down to that one choice. The inability to cope, loss of self-esteem, health or financial, loss of a significant others. How many times have we seen a wife or a husband who's died and then a spouse take their own life because their lives have been turned upside down? Additional factors, some of them we talked about: alcoholism, suicide attempts, previous histories. It's that pain. Pain that never goes away while you're in your conscious life. So we talked about all these. Let's talk about some people don't act depressed, and they hide it pretty well. They're very unhappy in their lives, but they play like they're a pretty happy person. So in some cases, rarely, there is no signs or symptoms. And it is very much of a shock, like it was in the neighboring fire department where a senior firefighter took his life a few months ago. This is a tough position for police officers to be in, suicide by cop. In LA, they estimate 1 in 10 fatal shootings was a suicide by cop. I don't have what it takes to take my own life, but I can put myself in a situation where someone takes my life for me. That is not recorded as a suicide. So when we talk about our suicide numbers, 32,000 people a year taking their own lives, this would not be included in there. It's a terrible situation for police officers to be in. Second-guessing their decision. Death by cop opens up officers to a lot of public scrutiny. Terrible situation for them to be in. All right, so that's us. Now we're going to respond. And we're going to respond to people who have attempted. We're going to respond to people completed. Anybody have an SOP in here? I got to be the only one. I know I'm the only one. You can pull that offline. I put it online with all of the other stuff you can get from this conference. You can pull our SOP offline, or I could send you my, like I said, I'll send you my whole research paper. So it starts out with the communication specialist. Could you imagine being on the other end of that phone when someone pulls the trigger? How awful could that be as a communication specialist? We instruct our specialists that you will stop every person who calls the center. You will make every attempt to stop that person's decision. You will try to... there's actually training for communication specialists on how to deal with suicide callers. That's where some of this information comes from. Take every threat seriously. Find out where they're at, determine where they're at, determine their location, develop a rapport. But understand one thing, that every individual who takes their own life, that is their responsibility for their final actions. And no matter what you say or did, so long as you tried to stop it and didn't blow it off, that is their responsibility. And that is nothing you could have maybe done differently that would have changed the outcome. So build a rapport, a bond with the caller. Get their first name, find out where they're at, gather as much information as possible, talk specifics. Don't talk around, be direct. Do you have the means? Do you have the method? What is your plan? Have you written a suicide note? That will really tell, like I said earlier, tell responders and communication specialists if this person is intent on doing that. Discuss with the person the reality and the finality of their decision, and try to bring in positive reinforcements. There is a lot to live for. Your son is going to grow up. He wants you to be there at graduation. Develop a rapport with these people. That's not what EMS people like to do. We're the 20-minute medical people. Get them in, get them out, move on to the next one. I've had patients that I've developed relationships with, and they are uncomfortable when they die. I've developed a relationship with this person, and am very uncomfortable when they pass on. We don't like to do that, and that's what we're asking communication specialists to do. We go on a lot of suicide attempters. Like I said, I showed you the Colorado statistics, 16 per 100,000. The national average is about 11 people per 100,000. 16 to 25 attempters for every completed suicide. So 34,000 people take their lives every year. Times that by 6 to 25 more who will attempt to take their own lives. So this is what we tell our folks. Establish the same rapport. Show compassion. It is not a nuisance call, and you can make a difference. And when you talk to people, families and survivors of suicide, they will tell you what you people say when you interface with them will stay with them for the rest of their lives. How you treat the families of people who've taken their lives, they will remember that for the rest of their lives. So be very careful on what you say. Be genuine, show sincerity, don't blame anybody, question them directly. Again, do you have the means? Do you have the method? Have you written a suicide note? Get that out of them, and believe it or not, you may stop someone from taking their own life because no one wants to listen to them usually. Transport them to the hospital. Nobody should be left alone if they have attempted suicide. Discuss with the family members about removing the lethal means. Okay, so Bob has a lot of guns. Colorado, guns are natural, man. You know, we had a senator who tried to, or a congress lady who tried to put, she backed a bill to restrict guns, and guess what the gun advocates did? She was out of office in Colorado in less than 6 months. Guns are a big part of our lives. We're a big state for guns, hunting, recreational hunting. It's a big business in Colorado. So what are you going to do with Uncle Bob? You're just going to, Uncle Bob's going to go to the hospital, and Uncle Bob's going to come back, and there's a whole safe full of guns. You've got to remove those lethal method and means from the location. Question the person directly. This is how we should have that checklist on lethality. Is this really serious? Question them directly. Are they talking about suicide? Do they have the plan? Let them tell you what the plan is. You'll know exactly how serious they are. Have you ever tried suicide before? Is there a note? That's pretty serious when they start writing the note. Do they have means? Is there evidence of previous injuries? Have they made the final arrangement? That guy who took his life at our station, when they went to his house, he had it all laid out. Had a note, all the insurance papers, who gets what. It was all laid out when they finally got to his house. Now you're going to see that. You are a gatekeeper of society. You are going to be in their homes. Look around. See what's going on. Don't miss these signs. Don't miss it. Here's a couple things not to do. Don't get into their macabre world, their disturbed thinking. Don't stare. Don't confuse them. There was a service in Denver. It used to be a standing joke that they would tell the guy, here's an X, get in the ambulance, sit on the X. And any mental health people they would have, they said, I'm going to put this imaginary box over your head, and now you can't talk to me. I can't even believe they would say that. Get in the ambulance, sit on the X, I'm going to put the imaginary box over your head, and now you're not going to talk to me. Don't confuse them. Don't joke. Don't laugh. Don't give them choices. This is the time for you to be in control. Don't deceive them. Don't touch them, okay, unless you have to. Completed suicides. Secure the scene till law enforcement gets there. Most of the time we don't go in. If we get the right information, we won't go in, okay? Like hopefully you wouldn't. You would stay back a block or two, wait for law enforcement, okay? Consider the death a crime scene. We don't know whether it's a homicide or a suicide. Restrict access to the room, to the area. Don't let people in or out. There's evidence everywhere. Watch where you walk, okay? Don't disturb the body except to declare death. And that can be kind of crazy. If you look at our Denver Metro Protocol, it says run a 1 minute of monitor strip and look for a systole for 2 minutes. Really? I mean, you can tell if somebody's dead and how long they've been dead. Okay? Confirm the identity of the person. We actually had a suicide where somebody went into the house of another person and took their own life. The wife comes home, thinks it's her husband. Thinks her husband took his own life. This was an intruder who came into their house and took his own life in their house. So for 45 minutes, we thought we were dealing with the husband, when in fact we were not dealing with the husband. Contact medical control for a time of death and write a detailed medical report. What do you typically write when you see a death? I got there, he was dead, I ran 2 minutes of strep, he was dead, and that was it. We want to know about what's the environment look like. What can you see that a coroner may not see when he gets the body? Write a detailed medical report. So on arrival, introduce yourself to the family, who you are, what your organization is, and get a rapport with them. Determine who each person is on scene. You don't want to be talking to somebody when you think it's a family member, when it's a nosy neighbor. Okay? Determine who people are. Secure the scene, restrict pets, and assist children. This is my dog. If I'm dead, she's going to want to find me, I guarantee you. She's going to try to find me. Okay? Small children, they're frightened. They don't know what's going on, but this is a short-term task. If you don't like kids, for the 20 or 30 minutes you're going to be with this crying kid, act like you like kids and provide support and care for that child. Suicide notes. Don't destroy them. Don't remove them. They're evidence. Be careful with them. You know, if somebody says, well, was there a note? Yeah, there was a note. Well, what does it say? I'm not at liberty to tell you. Someone will talk with you in the future about that. Things that are written in notes can be really, really bad and cause more guilt and more pain. Share your concerns with the family members about the notes. So survivors and victims, primary survivors, secondary survivors, we're the tertiary survivors of suicide. One of my guys said, and I said it in the article in JEMS, said, every time I go on a suicide, it puts another little black nick in my heart. I take those things away every time. Like I said, I could still remember some of them very vividly from my early years in my career. We're victims too. So if you think about the number of suicides, there's the number of survivors, 186,000 survivors every year. That's a lot of folks. Don't overlook their emotional trauma. What you say and do after a completed suicide will be remembered forever and ever. That is a heavy burden, so be careful with your words. How much time do we have left? It's 4:30? Okay. Okay. Let me finish up. Survivor's emotional response. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a lot about death and dying. It's still very apropos that people will go through all of these stages, and sometimes in the 10 minutes that you're there, you'll inform someone of death, and they'll go through all of these: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Sometimes it lasts for years before you get through those stages. But people will go through this, okay? And not every loss is the same. So healing can begin when you arrive. You are the cure. The way you teach, not the cure, but the way you handle the survivors is going to mean how they move forward. If you say an inappropriate thing, that could have put their healing back by months or years. So death notices confirm the identity, the date of birth, the time, place, confirm the location of the deceased. These are all things that should be in your report. Identify the immediate family members. Get a relationship with them and help them through this. Okay? Notify them in face-to-face. You know, we never want to tell people over the phone. That is, you don't know where they're doing. They're driving down the road. Your husband just died. That would be a bad thing. Okay? So we tell our folks, introduce yourself, you and your partner, show your identification. We wear badges most of the time so they know we're with the fire department. Find the primary family members and show compassion and move them to a private place. Don't tell them on the front porch where all the neighbors are wondering, why is the fire department there? Okay? Be direct, not suggestive. You need to sit down. I have some very bad news to tell you. Get right to the point. Use the deceased's name. Your husband died in the back room. It's very impersonable. I'm sorry to tell you that Bob is deceased in the other room. Include the facts. Use gentle eye contact. The power of touch when it's appropriate. Get down to their level. Sometimes hold their hand. There's some good things to say, and there is some bad things to say. No one ever taught this in paramedic school. No one ever taught us what to say. These are surely bad things. Let me get to the bad things. Here's the things to say. I'm really sorry. What not to say? I know how you feel. You do not know how I feel. How many times have you ever heard that? Time heals all wounds? No, it doesn't. People are going to deal with this loss for their whole lives. You must go on, get over this. You must focus on your memories. They're in a better place. Well, I don't feel like I'm in a better place right now. Anybody ever hear these? You must get a hold of yourself. You must be strong for your children. This is an awful time in people's lives. So treat them with dignity. They're going to remember this forever. Compassion, understanding, support. Allow them to grieve. They could go through all of those stages in a very short amount of time. Here's what they need. They need you to be sincere. They need to be grieving at their own pace, to be alone if they need it. You should get them help when you can. Call somebody. They need assistance. They need social services. I don't know if you have a victim's advocate. We call victim's advocate to the scene. And they need a private area. They don't need to be lied to. Tell them the truth, as difficult as that may be on you as a provider. So what to expect? Grief, guilt, shock, depression, etc., etc. It's even worse for children. Their whole world is turned upside down, and they're not going to understand it. We're out of time. I'm going to finish up. But if you want my research paper, I'll be glad to send it to you. My SOPs on the link to the conference, the brochures. There's a few of them in the back. So what we developed here, we developed a SOP for cleaning up. We developed funeral arrangements. That's not something we do, but it's something that you may want to help them through in the week ahead, especially people in our community, in small communities. You're going to know people in the small communities. There's a lot of caskets you can buy direct on order. There's mine right there. How do you like that one? There's my Dalmatian. I have a Dalmatian too, 9-month-old Dalmatian. So provide them with resources. These are the brochures that we developed that you can get from the link to the conference. So don't just walk away. Provide them a way of getting further help, okay? This is the one that we developed for recovering after suicide, and we have one also for attempted suicides, where to give them some information. So, not a cheery subject to end the conference with, but it's something we all need to talk more about because these are preventable deaths. I want to thank you all for coming today. You have a great evening in here in D.C., and go Broncos.